Hello and welcome to Shaka Extra Time. Shaka Sally is off, but joining me in studio is Peter Clotty, the kid from Ghana. Hello, Peter.
How are you, Paul?
How are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Good, good. A warm welcome to you all, our Facebook followers joining us live. Shaka Extra Time is a show that comes to you every Tuesday, and today we'll be talking about a wider range of issues, but we'll start in Ghana. So, Peter.
Yes.
The year of return.
Yes.
Everybody has been talking about it. Bring me up to speed.
Well, about a year ago, the president of Ghana, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, declared 2019 the year of return. It coincides with the 400 years of slavery, particularly in the Western countries and specifically here in the US. So approximately 1.2 million people so far have visited Ghana in connection with that. The country has realized approximately a few billions of dollars as a result of this year of return agenda that a lot of people in the diaspora have embraced. So we were fortunate to speak with the Ghanaian ambassador to the US, who was of the opinion that they've always seen African Americans or Africans in the diaspora as brothers and sisters, and that it is important for them to come home, retrace their roots, and invest in the country, if not the continent. So this is what is going on now. I also understand that Angola is taking the initiative because the first slaves that were documented to have arrived on the shores of the US, particularly in Virginia, were Angolans, 20 of them. So they are also taking the initiative. You have Nigeria, Ethiopia has done similar thing, but the emphasis has been on Ghana. Ghana has taken the year of return particularly well and embraced people. I even know that there are some communities, African-American communities in Ghana. Some chiefs have given them land to build, to invest in agriculture and all kinds of sectors of the country. So that's what is going on at the moment.
Interesting. In fact, the first time I ever visited Ghana, I happened to visit the Du Bois, the WED Du Bois Center downtown Accra. And one of the things that I really wanted to see was the kind of impact he had on the ground. This was, for people who don't know, maybe one of the few celebrated civil rights leaders here. But for some reason, he decided to leave America and go and settle back in Ghana. In fact, himself and his wife are all buried in Ghana. So fast forward so many years later, the Du Bois journey sort of symbolizes this profound desire of African Americans going back to Africa to retrace their roots. What has been the impact of Du Bois on Ghana and maybe to the larger extent African Americans?
You know, Du Bois going to Ghana was very significant because of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, the founding president of Ghana. His ideals, his vision attracted him. They bought into it. They shared the same ideology about uniting the African race or uniting Africa to have a common market, to basically replicate what the United States of America is, to have a global presence. Because some people even suggest that over 50% of the world's natural resources come from Africa. So if Africans would have absolute control of the natural resources as a united front, they will be able to compete better, they will be able to negotiate better for their product and resources. You know, the continent is rich with natural resources, among other issues. Then you have the famous Maya Angelou, who also went to Ghana. She stayed in the central region of Ghana. She spoke Fanti. She knew how to cook the food. And actually, her son is currently in Ghana, although he goes back and forth from the US to Ghana, but he resides in Ghana. So there's a huge African-American community there. There was this misconception that there's tension between Africans on the continent and African-Americans born here. That seemed to be dwindling now because of years of exposure But now you have a lot of African Americans going on the continent. Not only in Ghana, you go to Nigeria,
Right.
you go to Guinea, you go to even Kenya, East Africa, West Africa, even North Africa. So it's all going. So let's see how things pan out.
Yeah, let's talk about the political and economic impact that this has had. Was it a greater strategy for example, President Nana Akufo-Addo saying that taking this initiative by its horns and saying this has to happen this year?
Well, some suggest that it is a masterstroke for them, a marketing strategy that has attracted a lot of people to the country. The ambassador was saying they have issued out so many visas to people wanting to go to Ghana. And the Ghanaian government came up with an announcement just yesterday that they will give people visa on arrival. You know, so that is another strategy that is helping them. One of the criticisms being leveled against the administration, however, is that although the focus happened to be the people in the diaspora coming home, a lot of attention has not been paid to the locals on the ground to get them along. There's not much attention given to them, so that is the criticism. But
interesting.
The ambassador of Ghana to the US was telling me, well, people are coming home. If they come home and they invest, of course, it's the locals who are going to work in those manufacturing plants or investment capital that comes in. It will be beneficial to the locals as well. So they should be aware of what is happening, and let's see what happens.
You bring up a greater point talking about the locals here. I thought the locals should be priority because when these guys come, obviously they want to feel like they are being received very well or they are accepted in the community. So if you don't engage the community, how is this whole relationship going to work?
It's interesting because some TV and radio personalities were of the view that they were not involved in the promotion of the year of return. Some also suggest that perhaps the government wants to hold only a few people to participate in the program, but leaving them out. And they express some discomfort about it. But the government, as I understand, is trying to bring everybody on board because this is a year of return. Every African should be involved in spite of what their suspicions or criticisms or accusations are.
How about people who said that perhaps this is the greatest thing that has ever happened to Ghana? I was talking to a diplomat from Kenya saying that for the first time, Ghana beat them at what they call advertising or trying to sell their country.
Well, that is interesting because Kenya has always played a prominent role as a gateway to Africa, and particularly East Africa. Some people have suggested that there have been instances where people thought that tourist attractions in Tanzania were actually located in Kenya because of Kenya's strategy.
Right.
So it's interesting to hear Kenyans saying that. But this year of return has really placed focus and attention on Ghana. And people are learning about Ghanaian history, the hospitality, the food. And the ambassador told us something the other time when he came on Straight Talk Africa, when he talked about the Year of Africa. He said, for the first time, and I saw the video on WhatsApp, that's an African-American warning other African-Americans here that if they spend about 30 minutes in Ghana, they will not return to the U.S.
Interesting. I think that's a perfect segue to our next segment. Now let's go over to Southern Africa. Let's maybe start in Botswana. What's happening? I see the former president is not a happy camper. He's trying to, for lack of a better word, try to go after his predecessor. And yet this is the same guy who handpicked the current president to fall in his footsteps.
It's interesting because President Masisi, current President Masisi, who just won a landslide in the recent election, was a deputy to former President Seretse Khama Ian Khama. Now, the fallout came because of sharp policy differences. Seretse Khama Ian Khama believes that his predecessor, his former vice president, is doing away with some of his policies, and including, the hunt for task of hunting of elephants. And he believes that once that is done, we are talking about climate change and the protection of animals and all that. They agreed as a united front to do this, only for him to reverse some of the gains that they have made. So he's not particularly happy. He resigned from the Botswana People's Democratic Party, which is the BDP, the ruling party
that he helped to found.
His father actually helped to fund it, since his father led the country to independence, and was a founding member of the ruling party. He left the party, supported the opposition in the election, and then the accusation was that he supported the opposition so he could come back in a form of way, and he was rejected during the election. Although some of the opposition leaders have taken the matter up, they said they will legally challenge the outcome because they cited instances of voter irregularities and rigging. But it appears not to go anywhere. President Masisi has won the election and things are moving on. And last time, former President Seretse Khama Ian Khama threatened to sue the government because he said the government is using all kinds of tactics to tarnish his reputation of being corrupt. And that is where we are at the moment.
What do you make of the argument? I've seen some arguments out there that perhaps President Ian Khama is not in the right frame of mind because that he's all over the place.
Well, I have also heard about that. Some people suggest that it appears that he handpicked Mokwiti Masisi because he thought he could pull the strings behind the scenes or perhaps control him. When he got the presidency, he saw that he is his own man. He has been given a mandate by the people of Botswana, as they call them. And now he doesn't have to take any advice. Now, there were elders of the party and elders in Botswana who attempted to try to resolve this tension between the two gentlemen. All the efforts have so far not yielded any fruits.
But what does this say about the leadership on the continent, especially in light of somebody handpicking somebody, you hand them power, but all of a sudden it has also happened in Angola. The former president, Eduardo dos Santos, handpicked
Lourenço,
yes, and you see what he has done to
but,
him.
but Lourenço, while campaigning to become the president, despite taking over from Eduardo dos Santos, said that he was going to fight corruption. I was
starting with the former president's family,
well, you have
right?
to clean house, basically. and the Justice Minister of Angola is saying they have been able to retrieve about $5 billion of stolen public funds. Now, I was speaking with the Angolan foreign minister yesterday, and he is of the opinion that Angolans are now feeling the change of the fight against corruption, and it's not only fear, but the mindset appears to be changing. In so doing, he was here and is working or partnering with American institutions because they believe that some of the stolen funds are here in the U.S. So they're working with the Justice Department and other government institutions to try to retrieve that amount of money and take it back to Angola.
Interesting. Speaking of America, let's go to Zambia.
Right.
Zambia has been in the news lately, not for good reason, I hope, but they want the U.S. government to recall their envoy, the current U.S. ambassador to Zambia, for reasons best known to them. Why is that significant? President
Edgar Chagwa Lungu is displeased with the American ambassador Daniel Foote, because Ambassador Foote was critical of a decision by a court jailing 15 years 2 young men who were accused of having sexual relations. The government says that the Constitution of Zambia frowns on LGBT or gay issues, and that the Ambassador Foote was dabbling in the internal political dynamics of Zambia. So the foreign minister, Malanji, as he called him, sent a demarche. A demarche is a protest or a petition letter to Washington, D.C., ostensibly saying that the ambassador of U.S. to Zambia is behaving unethically. Now, critics of the government, however, say that the government was very quick to jump on the U.S. ambassador when he talked about respecting the human rights of LGBT issues in Zambia. But when he made similar accusations that the government is not fighting corruption, the government was quiet. So these are some of the dynamics going on in Zambia at the moment. But let us not forget that Zambia is the only African country that has declared itself as a Christian nation. In spite of having other minority religious groups, it is the only African country that calls itself a Christian nation.
But how about those people who argue that, for example, that President Edgar Lungu should not have his cake and eat it too? He can't be asking the United States for aid to help in so many different ways, but at the same time, he can't allow criticism coming from the United States.
You know, when I was speaking with the Isaac Chipampe, who is the spokesperson of the president yesterday, working on this story, he was of the view that when do you see ambassadors of African countries here in the U.S. criticizing the U.S. administration? He said if a Zambian ambassador to the U.S. would have done similar thing, within 48 hours, he would have been back in Zambia. And that most African
they have a
leaders,
great point.
Right, most African diplomats do not dabble in the internal political dynamic. One of the other criticism leveled against the U.S. ambassador was that he was called by the Zambian Permanent Secretary for Foreign Affairs. And according to the spokesman of the president, the U.S. ambassador was thinking that he is above the permanent secretary, and that, you know, he should be accorded that respect, that he should be meeting the president or perhaps the foreign minister rather than a junior rank official in Zambia by way of the permanent secretary of the foreign affairs in Zambia. And they were not too enthused about it, and that is why the president is displeased with the U.S. ambassador for trying to supposedly, quote, dictate how Zambians should behave when it comes to LGBT issues, which the government addresses that it's the Constitution frowns upon.
Yeah, interesting stuff, interesting stuff. Let's move along. Let's go to South Sudan. Let's start with Aliyu Ahmad. What is the latest from South Sudan?
Before coming to the studio, I was speaking with Pope Balwang and Peter Manawa. These are spokespeople, basically, for the Sudanese South Sudan Liberation Movement, or Sudan People's Liberation Movement in opposition, SPLM-IO, led by Dr. Riek Machar. This follows the meeting between Riek Machar and South Sudan President Salva Kiir. They have agreed that they will dispel any rumors of returning to conflict or returning to war, and that the support that is needed, financial support that is needed to move people, soldiers or military groups or armed groups from the cantonment area to be resettled, to ensure that there's a unity government, a transitional unity government established that will lead the country to a possible election is addressed. So this is the latest development of the two gentlemen after meeting, agreeing that, yes, we need to form a transitional unity government to move the process forward. So hopefully with this declaration and commitment, you know, espoused by both sides, South Sudanese caught in the conflict between the two groups would have some respite.
But Peter, how about people who argue that we've seen this script before, we've read these speeches before, we've seen so many accords signed into peace accords signed, but these two leaders have failed to sit down as gentlemen and maybe form a government of national unity?
I've heard that, and some also suggest that perhaps these two leaders are not the people to lead the revitalized peace agreement, or perhaps lead the country in a transitional period because of the alleged distrust or mistrust and suspicion from both sides, and that perhaps sanctions should be placed on both sides to ensure that they expedite action to form a transitional government, bring some peace and security, and embrace the tenets of democracy so South Sudanese can determine who their leaders are. It remains to be seen if the international community will go ahead, because last time when they extended the pre-transitional period, the U.S. administration was not particularly happy. IGAD wasn't happy as well. The African Union wasn't happy. So the international community appears to be frustrated with the lack of progress in bringing peace to South Sudan, the youngest nation on planet.
Let's go back to Southern Africa. Let's go to Namibia. Let's go to Medicine Alex, watching from Namibia. Can you talk about the politics? What's happening in Namibia? We know the current president recently won a new term, so he has a mandate maybe to lead for another 5 years.
But for the first time, SWAPO, the ruling party which effectively led Namibia to independence, seemed to have dropped a significant amount of vote, over 25% of the vote, which is bad. However, the second person who came in the presidential election is still or remains a member of SWAPO. Disgruntled with what was going on, he decided to go independent. Now, the SWAPO decided to take him to court, but the court smacked SWAPO down, saying that he has every right as a legitimate citizen of the Republic of Namibia to contest in an election in spite of his political affiliation. So the court granted him leeway to stand, and he gave the president a run for his money. Now, it remains to be seen if the political landscape can change, because despite the losses or the loss of support, President Hage Geingob still won re-election. The numbers in parliament might have dwindled, so it behoves the opposition to come together if they want to pose any significant threat in the future to SWAPO. Now, ahead of the election, there were allegations of corruption in the fishing industry, where two prominent parliamentarians and strong members of SWAPO were alleged to have dabbled in corruption. They are still behind bars. They refused them bail. So coupled with that, I spoke with Dr. Hengari, who is a special advisor to the president, who is of the view that because of drought, because of economic challenges, there were some economic headwinds which really affected the president's promises about transforming the economy, creating jobs for the youth. But he promised that the president will keep his word and that he's going to come up with measures to create jobs for the Tumi youth and reduce youth unemployment. Let's see if that will be able
how
to
about
contest.
those people who said that our President Hage Geingob is a typical African leader? He could not afford to lose an election.
Well, so far, the opposition said that they are gathering evidence to go to court because they thought there were some voter irregularities here and there. Now, it remains to be seen if some of the evidence they have will be enough that the court will throw out the election and have it rerun. Because both local and international poll observers said the elections were free, fair, transparent, and credible.
Let's go to an interesting question from Hali Asu. What is the major reason that African rulers have become beggars in the world, while North Korea, with all the sanctions in the world, is not begging? Great point, I guess.
Well, he has a great point, but North Korea has nuclear weapons, which is a big bargaining or leveraging point for them. Africans have not been able to move to the technological space yet. Africa has
but
made
we have
some
the
strides.
minerals.
Well,
for example, Congo has the resources that we have all the uranium that we need to make these nuclear weapons.
But you have to be able to transform the natural resources to what you need to build your economies. If you are unable to do that, then somebody will determine the price of the commodities or the resources that you have. Until Africa gets to that position to determine what it can. For example, there have been instances where African countries have oil, but they are not able to refine their own oil.
Nigeria
in some instances, they have to even import oil, refined oil, into their economies, and that is difficult to take. So Africans would have to determine that, look, if we have this resource, I know of an African country that says we are not going to mine these natural resources until we have the capability to do so. But
that's Ghana.
Well, Eritrea have a similar policy. But now,
but how can they do that when they are closed? They are not even allowing anybody.
Well, and that is the challenge, because you need people. you need the investment to transform the economy, to broaden the tax base, and to create jobs for your teeming youth. So it's between, a lot of these African countries are between a rock and a hard place. They have to come up with strategies to ensure that the natural resources that are beneath the earth go to the benefit of the people. They have to do that.
That's a great one. Let's go to another quicker comment. Let's go to M's Hearts Charles. How will the African continent, create a common identity of peace between member states when some countries are closing borders? And in this particular case, I think they're talking about Uganda and Rwanda. There's been tension surrounding the border. You know,
speaking with the Angolan foreign minister, he is of the view, since Angola heads the peace and security organ of the African Union, they met recently with officials of both Uganda and Rwanda trying to resolve the tensions between them. It's really odd that at a time when the African Union or the African community is creating a common platform for all Africans to trade among themselves, because intra-African trade is sharply reduced. Africans are trading more with other countries outside the continent that are trading among themselves. So it's really odd that there's this tension that seemed not to be going forward. Both President Yoweri Museveni of Uganda and President Kagame of Rwanda met. They said they were going to meet again to try to resolve the issues between them. It seemed not to be going forward. So they need to find a solution to this. The tension there where people are being killed cross-border, some people are being snatched, others are being undermined, or they are accusing each other of supporting armed groups that opposes them or being trained in each other's countries. The suspicion is too much. They need to find a solution to this, because across the border, there are the same people. You know, there are some ethnic groups that are across the border. They walk across each time because you have uncles and aunties living on both sides of
the same language.
Speak the same language. So why not resolve the tension and allow, you know, goods and human beings to move back and forth to, you know, create more jobs for the people?
In less than 30 seconds, what are you talking about tomorrow?
We are talking about refugees and migration. That's what we'll be focusing on, because there are big conferences coming up ongoing in Switzerland, and issues of migration and refugees have always been quite a challenge to some people due to economic challenges. Some people will die on the various you know, seas and oceans and all that. There has to be a solution to help these refugees, at least so they can better their lives.
So what are the external forces that push some of these people to be leaving their countries?
I have heard arguments that the countries these people come from are not well off, and there are challenges in their country. So these refugees want a better life for themselves. So they will do whatever is possible to try to get to a place where they anticipate would be better for them and for their families.
Unfortunately, Peter, we've run out of time. For that, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure hosting you, and I look forward to hosting you on another edition of Shaka Extra Time. Until then, so long from Washington. Thanks, man.